All right, good evening, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to the I guess we're the special meeting of the Lebanon Historic Preservation Commission. Christy, will you take the roll call, please?
Casey Sampson.
Present.
Jim Marag. George Piper.
Here.
Chad Reed.
Present.
Linda Ridgway.
Here.
All right, we do have a quorum to conduct business tonight. Approval of minutes from when was our last meeting? January. Thank you. Oh, it's been a couple of months. If everyone has had a chance to look those over, I will entertain a motion for approval of the January 2018 minutes.
I make a motion we approve.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? All right, motion carries. We have a few items on the agenda tonight, so that's kind of exciting. Don't usually have more than one thing here. So our first item is a certificate of appropriateness from Mark Sullivan, 101 West Main Street. He is requesting a COA for exterior brick facade preservation, repairing damaged mortar, refurbishing and replacing deteriorated brick, restore and reinforce parapet walls, and remove paint from brick facade. First we'll hear from staff, then we'll hear from the client.
Thank you very much, and thank you to the commissioners tonight for having this special meeting. A little off the cuff, sort of, so not the regular night anyway. So the first application, 101 West Main Street, Mark Sullivan, as you said, George, is a brick facade restoration project, and it's actually a little bit more than that. There are some portions of this project that are outside of the facade and really outside of our guidelines, but with the new grant procedures in place, he has to get a COA from you all in order to ask for a grant from the RDC. So that's why you see some of the things on some applications tonight that are a little outside of the normal application that you would hear typically. So the applicants and I have been working very closely on this proposal. We've talked about proper brick restoration procedures, what it would look like to remove the paint, and if it would be appropriate. In the landmarks staff report, he mentions if the building was not painted previously, it would be appropriate to remove the paint. I have a picture from like 1912, and the detail isn't real great. I did find a picture from 1977, and the building itself is not painted. So my guess, without actually having concrete evidence of that 1912 picture, is that it was not painted historically. So it would be appropriate to remove the paint. You know, there are several different methods to removing the paint, and both applications or both estimates from the applicant you know, suggest a test spot before moving any further to make sure that their practice is going to work. So one of the things that came in kind of last minute on this application is the mention of the steel cap would not be appropriate historically. Mr. Sullivan has done his best to figure out what that would look like and how that would change the proposals, and it does very little to change the proposals if he goes back with a Spanish tile type cap. So he has agreed to take a look at that approach versus the steel cap. So that's about all I have in summary for this application.
All right. Any questions for staff at this time?
Are we going to hear from?
Yeah, we'll hear from the client as well.
Okay.
Yeah. Or from the applicant, I should say. All right. If there's no questions for staff, we will hear from the applicant. Please give your name and address for the record, please. Business address is fine. Yes, yeah, at the podium, okay. Please. Thank you. And if you have any materials to show, you can use the projector there.
Oh, okay, terrific. My name is Mark Sullivan. My address is, I'm an attorney here in town, and I'm also the Small Claims Court Commissioner for Boone County. I've been the Small Claims Court Commissioner for about 20 years now. I lived in Boone County since 1990, and I've had a business here, office here since the mid-90s. I very much love Lebanon, living here, working here, and that's what led me to purchase this building that I'm asking for help with financially. We purchased it, my partner and I, we purchased it in October of 2016. You're probably familiar with it. It's the white painted building right on the corner of Main Street and Meridian Streets, right next to Greek's Pizza. That's how I usually tell people they can find it. Just everybody knows where Greek's is. It's just that white building right on the corner. Our plan is to eventually move my law office to that building, but we also have a tenant in the first floor, St. Clair Industries. They've been there quite a long time as well. I think they're a good business client here in the city. But as far as they occupy the first floor, the second floor, though, to say it was a train wreck when we bought it was probably not doing justice to it. We have been engaged since October of 2016, mainly with just peeling back the layers of it to see what we have. And I will candidly admit, and I disclosed this to Derek in response to a very pointed question from him one time when he was over there recently looking at the building. Did you guys have any idea what you were getting into? And I must say I had no idea. I had never done this before. There's some good days and there's some bad days, but we feel like we've been making progress with it, but we've mostly been in a demolition mode because as we peel back the layers, we find more and more things that are wrong with the building, which now it doesn't surprise us anymore because we realize that there's been very little done, at least with the second floor, in 100 and plus years with it. You folks were kind enough to advance us $10,000 last year to help rebuild the back wall of the building, which deteriorated due to water penetration along the roof line. We weren't there, it was 2012, but that is what everybody has told us who is in the know concerning that building. It was a total collapse of that rear wall. We have since rebuilt that rear wall. The only thing really remaining is we haven't put the fire escape in, but we've got some repurposed materials that we were able to locate locally here, and we're going to put the fire escape back into it later on this summer. But the rear wall collapse, it took the whole rear wall, took the fire escape, it took the rear door to the back wall, took a good part of the back room of that building. So it was quite an expense to rebuild it. I think it's $30,000 and counting right now. But again, the $10,000 you folks advanced us helped quite a bit. So thank you very much for that. We knew that there was the west wall of the building was going to be in need of restoration, repair, rehabilitation. When we bought the building and we had it inspected, the inspector did make that a priority, at least with his reports, and I brought that report if you'd like to see it, saying that we really needed to address that. But we were hoping to buy some time because there was so much that needed to be done on the interior of the building, and that would include plumbing, electrical. We've had ATEC over there putting electrical in there. We've had a local plumber, Adam Sonderholm. He's redone a lot of the plumbing, which actually was just in the nick of time because we were about to burst a pipe with our that ran into our tenant's space down below. But anyways, we've been putting off doing this brick restoration, hoping we wouldn't need to right away. But as I've told Derek, and I've shown him pictures of it, we noticed that there is water coming now inside the building from that west wall. And based upon our observations, we believe that it's coming in from that west wall that was in pretty dire need of attention. I've got a couple pictures here I could show you real quick. And do I just put them down here on this sheet? Okay. And then do I turn on anything?
They'll get it up there.
Okay.
Look up here.
Yes, that's it. And it's not terribly clear. What it shows, though, is there's water. This is a walkway that runs along the brick wall that separates the two, components of the building itself. It's a 30-foot wide building, and there's 15-foot firewalls, basically. This is along the firewall, but it's on the west wall that's exposed. And as you can see, there's water that has come down and is pooling down there at the bottom. This actually was about 3 days after the rain event, and so the water was actually pooled quite a bit more. It caused us a great deal of concern that it was getting now inside the building because, again, from what we were told, that is exactly what happened in 2012, which caused the rear wall to collapse. The water penetrated right along the roof line, came down, and that wall during a fairly big rain event just gave away. So I called or emailed Derek sort of in a panic because we were kind of wanting to put it off, and I said, Derek, can we get this in front of somebody so that we maybe can get some help with this wall, getting it rebuilt. I don't know if you folks have in front of you pictures of that west wall. It was with the materials that we submitted. I think it's pretty, the pictures speak for themselves as far as the extent of the deterioration and the need for the rehab in that area. Well, like a lot of projects with this building, it seemed to grow arms and legs. We thought, well, since we'd like to get some help with that part of the building, and it really does need it, what about the east wall, which is also showing signs of deterioration, particularly, say, in the lower 10-foot portion of that building, which is the most important, the foundation. So we included with our proposal a request that we be allowed to also rehab that part of the building as well, and there should be photographs in the package that we submitted. And then in talking to Derek and letting him know what our plans were eventually with the brick, we told him we would love to get the paint off that building, the brick, and have it be restored to its original footprint, if you will. And he said, well, it's no time like the present. Since you're going to be doing tuck pointing, it probably makes a lot of sense just to go ahead and try to get all that paint off while you're doing it all in one project. So again, typical with this building, the project, which was, we thought, rather focused, started growing arms and legs again. So anyways, we've submitted proposals for both the brick rehab, repair, restoration, along with two proposals for that, one from Isley Masonry and also one from Pioneer Restorations. We also submitted two proposals from those same entities for removal of the paint on both the north wall and the east wall, which are the only painted walls of that building. And we're submitting those to you good folks for consideration.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Sullivan. Any questions for the applicant at this time?
Only because I know Pioneer Restoration more. What's their opinion on taking this, whatever the solvent is they have to use to take the paint off? How is it going to, because a lot of the brick from their pictures are really badly crumbled in, deteriorated. What's their opinion on whether that's going to cause more damage or whether it's feasible to do? They wouldn't have given you the estimate if there wasn't.
Yes. Pioneer Restorations is actually, and I don't know a lot about that, so I'll qualify my answer with that statement. They're both approaching it from two different methodologies. Pioneer Restorations felt as if a baking soda application followed by a water pressure treatment was the answer. And John Reed at Pioneer Restorations, if you know Pioneer Restorations, great guy. I trust him because he's been doing this for so long. But I would be not being totally truthful if I didn't tell you that I was a little bit concerned with the baking soda / water spray solution. But he assured us that it was the best, that it would be fine and it would not at all damage the mortar. Now, the other one from Isley Masonry, theirs I think was a lot more friendly to a historic building. It basically, you put a large, I guess, sheet of this material or solvent, I think it is, that just works, and then it's again, sprayed off with a very mild water spray. But to me, that seemed to be a little less intrusive, a little more friendly to the historic building itself. So,
Sam, can I ask your opinion on that? You agree?
Sure. Sure, come on up, Sam.
I'm Sam Burgess, Historic Preservation Commission staff, full-time Indiana Landmarks employee under contract with the city. I think this is a great proposal overall, but I would definitely second the notion that the peel-away solvent-based application is more appropriate and more preservation-friendly. Baking soda blast, the word blast is concerning. Usually it's a little too strong. And generally you don't want to use an alkali-based paint remover on brick. Brick is more kind of non-sensitive to acid than to alkali materials. So my staff recommendation was to approve the project with the caveat that the peel away, or better yet, some sort of organic solvent be used, but not the baking soda. Along with a few other things like just maintaining the historic joint profiles and making sure that any replacement bricks are compatible in size, shape, texture, things like that with the historic bricks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I had one more question of you, Mr. Sullivan.
Yes, ma'am.
Before we invest more money into your project, your monster project, what is your game plan for long-term? I know you're not there yet, for this portion.
Well, we don't have a game plan other than we hate that, and we'd like to get rid of it.
So what I say the same, yeah.
It reminds me of that interior ceiling popcorn sort of texturing.
So at this point, you don't know what's under there or whether it could easily be taken off, and because if you're going to be taking paint off, it seems like you'd want to know what's behind there and do the project complete.
I can tell you this, and there's I'll show you another picture here.
If we're looking at improving the downtown, which is your pride in this will be included,
yeah, this is
that should go.
Yeah, this is a photograph, if I can get some help there. This is our building here, Adler's. They had some, what I think is Victorolite, which is really a nice, shiny material that marble-like almost, which I really like. I'm not saying that that's the ultimate solution, but that would be something certainly much preferred over what we have now. But I don't know what happened to that Victorolite. We're looking for it. We're hoping somebody maybe saved it and put it in the building somewhere, but we've just not found it anywhere.
So you don't think it's possible to take it off and just the original brick was there? Because this has been added. I mean, it's pretty obvious.
Oh, yes, yes. And if I could show you just a couple other quick pictures. Yeah, this building here, right here, the Shu Building, probably not, yeah. This was taken, pretty close to around the turn of the century. And you can see what they did back then was, these buildings were all brick all the way down. There's another one. I don't know if you can see that right there, that building there. That's the 101 building. And you can see it's brick all the way down except for the windows in the front. Well, at some point, some enterprising man or woman came along and said, hey, look, you need a storefront. And so this was the solution. They knocked out the bricks. You see that right there? That's a metal girder that they put in so that the bricks had to have some support. So in answer to your big lawyer-like answer to your question, I think if we peel back the Adler's sign, what we're going to find are metal girders like that support the upper brick. And then there's not going to be anything down below other than, glass facade, because, again, that's somebody at some point took all the bricks out on all the buildings. I mean, all the buildings around the square, they're all the same sort of structure. Like I said, somebody must have had a franchise for this. Steel girders and just said, get rid of all the brick facades, at least on the first floor, and we'll make it kind of showroom-like. So I would love to have a brick facade. I'm not sure that commercially it would be attractive to someone who was wanting a business there, but I definitely agree with you, ma'am, that popcorn gray, it's got to go. I don't know, Terry, do we have a plan yet for that? Yeah, like I said, we're still trying to ameliorate the train wreck of, and we're pulling out there's wiring in there that dates back to the turn of the century. It's just, it's been, yeah, yes.
I know I keep asking you, Sam, but we fall back on you. Do you think that what do you think could be under there, and whether it should be even attempted?
I think it's likely that there would be some, historic girder, something of that nature back there. I'd imagine any earlier signage is gone, even if it would fit under, an encasing material. But I think it is likely that some of that original structure is still underneath. I think there's some non-destructive testing that could be done, or minimally destructive testing, like boring small holes in the existing surfaces and, doing some scoping to see what could be behind the surface materials. That, would require some investment, but it might be worth it. And other than that, I would just recommend the very careful removal of anything that's currently covering earlier facing, so that if what's discovered beneath the existing surface is not what was anticipated, it can be placed back where it was.
I had one other comment. There was a suggestion by Derek that the steel coping that was part of the proposal for Isley masonry, that's not going to be in keeping with the historic design features of the building itself. And we didn't give Isley masonry those kinds of guidelines. But again, I spoke with Isley Masonry today, and they said that that'll be no problem staying with the original. And to the extent that there are clay tiles missing or in need of replacement, those can be found. In fact, I found some on eBay today. I was telling Derek, like $10 a piece, so it's not going to be horribly expensive. Can I point out one other thing on the Isley Masonry estimate that's in front of you? There were two line items at the top, and Derek, I don't know if you mentioned that to them, that those two line items at the top for $850 a piece, those are actually interior fixes. They're just basically holes, gaps in the brick between our building and the Greeks building. We are not including those. Those should not have been included in this facade proposal. So if you would please, if you're thinking about allowing us that, those should be excluded. And that would bring the total estimate down to $21,700 if you take those two out. And again, I just wanted you to be able to compare apples to apples. That is an entirely interior to our building. We're going to have it done eventually because we want to make sure that the two buildings are separate, entirely separate. The other thing I would mention about the Isley, and that's the $7,800 down at the bottom, and that's for the installation of the steel coping. That I talked with Isley today, and they said that using the clay, staying with the clay, it shouldn't exceed that, and chances are, I think it's going to be less based upon my discussions with him. I think it's going to be closer to about half that. So that number would be closer to $4,000. So just again, wanted to be completely candid about those two items.
Do you know, what is your timeline for, I mean, I know it's an ongoing project, but what's your timeline to do this work on the walls?
Well, I've not talked to John at Pioneer Restorations. When I was talking with Isley today, they said they could start in 3 weeks. And we want them to start with that east wall because that's the one that's in most need. He said that he feels like he can finish the entire project, both the repair, rehab, tuck pointing, everything else, plus the removal of paint. He said 3 weeks, and he told me that he has that availability once he starts, which he said, again, 3 to 4 weeks is when he would start. But we definitely are concerned about the water coming in. So sure. I told him, yeah, we definitely need to have that done. We don't want to have another wall collapse event and have it take, a third of the building with it, the back of the building. So.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Sullivan.
Okay.
This is a public meeting, so if there's anyone from the public who has any comments on this project, if they want to step forward to the microphone.
One last thing, I'm 64 years old, and this is not the smartest thing I've ever done in my life, I will say that. But it's a labor of love. Yeah, we should be downsizing, but we really want to make this a real nice building for the school.
All right. Seeing no public comment, we'll close the public comment portion on this application. Board, or what's your pleasure on this one?
Well, some questions. If we've got the two estimates, and like Mr. Sullivan said, I'm a little concerned about the Pioneer Restoration effort. If we approve this, is there a way to stipulate or recommend that they follow the second quote, or is that up to?
I think,
what else?
Well, I mean, it's kind of alluded to in the recommendation, I believe. So what is that? How enforceable is that, Derek?
Yeah, I mean, I think, we're in a little muddy waters here because of the transition of the way all the new grant language is identified in the resolution. And he has to provide, this is outside this meeting, but has to provide 2 estimates at the RDC level. Mm-hmm. And the RDC level will grant the applicant based off of the lower of the 2 estimates. Now, I still feel like you have somewhat control of what method that the applicant is going to use, no matter this application or future application. So, but nonetheless, that's why you have both estimates. And I'm still trying to feel my way through this on what all you need to see, what all the RDC needs to see. And for this meeting, I just provided everything to you, same as I'm going to provide to the RDC. If there are things in there that you don't need to see and the RDC doesn't need to see, we will certainly start to narrow those things down as we move on, because I have a feeling we're going to be fairly busy from here on out with the grant opportunities. But back to answer your question, Chad, I think you can issue your COA based off whatever recommendation you feel best. And then he still has to provide the 2 estimates at the RDC level, but he'll have to work off of the estimate that is the method that you'd like use, or talk the second contractor into using that same type of method as well. So that'll be up to him outside of the approvals once we get to that point.
Okay.
Would the RDC still have to approve the lower estimate, even though they're 2 completely different ways of accomplishing that task? One being safer than in professional opinion, safer than the other? I mean, it seems like...
Casey, that's a good question. And I don't know if I have a good answer for that yet, since we haven't been through that RDC process yet. So, because, the RDC resolution is great. I'm not saying that it isn't, but it's black and white. And as Mr. Sullivan alluded to, there is no black and white with these historic buildings. And I hope our last applicant is listening very well to this tonight, because he knows what he's getting into. But it is certainly, it can change on the fly when you're out there. So we'll have to figure that out kind of with the RDC, I guess, is probably my best answer to that. But
if I can make a comment based on my experience with utilities, yes, you usually do, but if you don't want to, you stipulate why, and it's rarely any issues. But for the safety of the project, I would think that would be a good enough reason.
yeah,
absolutely.
But yeah, you're supposed to take the lower based on equal,
right.
and this isn't based on outcome.
Sure.
So.
Yep. And that'll be something we relay to the RDC when we get to that point. I think it's a good example. Maybe the first example is a good example that they're going to have to listen to how this kind of all played out at this level, so that they know, because that's why they wanted it to come to the HPC first for a COA, because you all are acknowledged as the expert in this process. And if you have a specific recommendation, I have a hunch they're going to listen to that recommendation.
All right, any other questions, comments from the board?
I only have one, I'm sorry, I'm bugging you.
That's fine.
So you're going to do the, oh shoot, east side? Is that the big long side? But not the front?
No, the front would be included. The front is...
Looks pretty good.
Per the estimates that we received, the front is not in great need of anything other than the paint removal. It's in pretty decent shape. But we would have them do that as well. And I think that John Reed in Pioneer Restorations, he was thinking that only like 5% of it was needed based on what he observed. And I think Isley was saying about 15%. So it definitely, the need is not there for the front, but they are going to go ahead and do it, just so it's done and done completely. So that'll be totally off the list. And so that'll be the front, the north side, and the east side, both the ones that are, and then the west side is the one that is in.
Okay, and I know that isn't part of your project right now, but for investment purposes, us looking at the future and what the building's going to look like for our job of how it appears to the historic preservation of downtown, that was my concern for that banding, and what your intent is, it looks nice painted the way it is, except for the banding.
Right, exactly. And again, looking at the estimates, I think that they reflect the fact that the front, the north side, the Main Street side is definitely not in dire straits and need.
Right.
Yeah. What was interesting, and John Reed told me this, he said that, because I asked him, why is the bottom part, like the bottom 10 feet, so bad of that building on the east side? And he said he thinks it's from salt trucks going by and spraying salt up on the bricks. Because there seems to be like a definite line of demarcation where it's definitely worse as you go down. I don't know. John would know, I guess. He's kind of lived in the past. He called it the Adler Building. That's how he's always known it, I guess. So, anyways. I think that, in following up what Derek was saying, excuse me, John's estimates were higher. And so we recognize that Isley may be the more competitive number, or the better number. And so it might work out very nicely with the way Isley is sort of approaching this project from the paint removal standpoint and the other aspects of the project. So.
All right, appreciate your time today, Mr. Sullivan. If there are no other comments or questions from the board, I will entertain a motion.
How would we like that lengthily worded with the stipulation of using the non-abrasive method?
The motion is to approve the COA as submitted with the stipulation to, that the contract, whoever gets the contract employs the non-abrasive method of paint removal. All right, do we have a second?
Second.
All right, Christie, will you take the roll, please?
Yes. Casey Sampson,
Aye.
George Piper,
Aye.
Chad Weed,
Aye.
Linda Ridgway.
Aye.
All right, motion carries 4-0, thank you. And good luck at the RDC.
Yes, thank you all very much.
All right. Next item on the agenda, there's two, I'll mention both the items, they're related, but we will take action on them separately. We have two certificates of appropriateness from Chris Edwards, Big Four Trail Crossing LLC. They're initially first requesting a COA for demolition of 3 structures located at 224 South Meridian Street, 304 South Meridian Street, and 310 South Meridian Street. A second COA is a proposal for 3 mixed-level use developments to be located at those same 3 addresses I mentioned previously, and also 320 South Meridian Street. We'll first hear from staff, and then we'll hear from the applicant.
Thank you, George. Okay, so the first one, as you mentioned, is a demolition COA, and the demolition COA has to be approved in order to get to the second part of the application. I can tell you through lots of conversations here over the last month that the demolition COA is certainly the most controversial portion of this application. The properties are listed contributing in our historic district. And contributing structures should be avoided for demolition if at all possible. One of the things cited, and I'm going to let the applicant speak to this because he had more opportunity to get in and assess the buildings, is that if a property basically cannot be economically viable to be reused, that is a qualification for demolition, receiving a COA demolition. Let me back up a little bit here, and we've given the addresses, but I want to see if this will work or not. It's not going to work. There we go. Okay, so these are the 3 structures that are being proposed for demolition. This site right here is just south of the CVS parking lot. There's a structure in between, and then the 2 southern structures from that building in between. Our property, just to give you an idea of where we're at, is we're sitting right here right now. And this is the grass empty lot. So as I mentioned, the structures themselves are listed as contributing. They're contributing. Sam will probably be able to speak to this more than I can because of the architectural design, the 4-square design of these properties, which was popular in the early 1900s. You know, whether or not there's any contributing architectural style left to these buildings, again, I'm going to let Sam speak to that. He's the expert. But as far as the structures themselves, the use of those buildings contributing to our downtown historic district, I would say, is little murky at best. They are weekly rentals. They are not in the best shape, and again, I'm going to let the applicant speak to that because they have been inside and assessed the properties and what it would take to renovate those. Sorry, let me get back to my staff report here real quick.
On that, while you're getting back to that, on the question of economic viability, I think that you mentioned earlier that, or the question of whether it's makes economic sense to rehab it in its current state. Who makes that determination? I mean, is that subjective? Is it determination? Is there a objective criteria that go into that?
I'd say it's. You might get differing opinions on this, but I'd say it's subjective. I think the real estate market, and there's a real estate professional here that can speak to this as well, plays into this. The assessed value of what a home will bring here in Lebanon, specifically the downtown. I can tell you from experience that I've had, there's a certain threshold where all this makes sense if you're going to take those properties and renovate them and sell them as single-family homes. I would say the investment needed in these cases per home, you're possibly looking at $350,000.
Is that each?
Each, with the investment. So the question becomes, would you pay $400,000 for a house in a single-family home in downtown Lebanon? I don't know that those numbers are supported right now, currently with assessed values here in Lebanon. It'd be tough. Not to say it's not impossible. I think you'd have a better shot of that situation if you have an owner-occupied scenario. But still, that takes a special person, labor of love, who wants to get into these scenarios and maybe not have or not be able to pull out what they have into it. So obviously the applicant is looking at it and did look at it from that perspective at first. Thought, okay, great, we'll just buy these and we'll turn them into single family homes, and I'll let him speak more about that when he gets up here. But to do that, put all those resources into it, and then walk away and break even, it doesn't make good business sense. Now, as far as historical preservation, maybe that does make sense in the historical preservation world, but again, you got to find that right person to come in and buy these and do that. So, that's something for you all to decide tonight, but the demolition of these properties, in my opinion, could lead to a more a product that could work better for our district and make our district better than what we currently have. So, with that, I will turn it over to the applicant at this time, unless you have any other questions for me, and they can speak to more of what they've seen on the inside.
I don't have any questions for you, Derek. I think I will hear from Sam first, though.
Yeah, sure, no problem.
From the historic preservation side, and then before we hear from the applicant.
Okay.
Since he is, he's staff as well, or quasi-staff, so.
Thank you. Sam Burgess again. I thought I would just kind of go through an analysis of this application. I'll say up front that my staff recommendation is not to approve the application. And I'll go through the reasons for that. The first is that the awarding of a COA for demolition is generally at odds with the purposes of historic preservation stated in the city's historic preservation ordinance. The ordinance states that the purpose of preservation as recognized by the city is to maintain established residential neighborhoods in danger of having their distinctiveness destroyed. And I think we can agree that these properties are part of an established residential neighborhood. They're also, as Derek mentioned, identified as contributing resources within the district. And that, according to the city's definition, means that they are important to the density or continuity of the density of an area's historic fabric. So regardless of some of the changes that have happened to the exteriors of these properties, they still maintain their form, they still maintain their essential character, they're still legible as early 20th century American foursquares, and with proper restoration they could be brought back closer to their historic appearance. The second reason for denying a COA in this case is a mismatch with the design guidelines that the proposal shows. The guidelines state that demolition of a contributing building within the district is inappropriate and shall be avoided. So there would have to be exceptional circumstances to justify awarding a COA for demolition. And this might be a good time to mention too that the district has about 75 properties. This COA application is asking to take down 3 of them, which would equate to removing about 4% of the total number of historic properties in the district. So, you think of how quickly demolitions could add up and amount to removing quite a few of the historic contributing structures. Next reason to seriously consider denying a COA for this proposal is that it is at odds with at least 2 of the Secretary of the Interior standards for the treatment of historic properties, which are the basis for the design guidelines and the historic preservation ordinance in Lebanon. Those standards specifically are numbers 2 and 6. Standard number 2 is, it states that the historic character of a property shall be retained and preserved. The removal of historic materials or alteration of features and spaces that characterize a property shall be avoided. And the ultimate removal of historic materials and the ultimate alteration of features and spaces that characterize a historic property is to demolish the property altogether. The other standard here is stating that deteriorated historic features shall be repaired rather than replaced. Where the severity of deterioration requires replacement of a distinctive feature, the new feature shall match the old in design, color, texture, and other visual qualities, and where possible, materials. So this proposal to demolish historic contributing properties because they have deteriorated features certainly doesn't offer to repair rather than replace. And the proposed replacement is something very different in character and material than what is existing. As Derek mentioned, there are 3 possible conditions for allowing COA for demolition within the district for contributing property. The first possible condition is that the property is an immediate hazard to public health or safety. And I think given that these properties continue to be occupied and lived in, it would be very hard to make a case that these pose an immediate threat to public health or safety. And I think the commission would need to be presented with a great deal more evidence in order to come to that conclusion than what it currently has in hand. The second possible exception for granting a COA for the demolition of a contributing structure is for granting the demolition of a structure in the district is if that structure is classified as non-contributing. That is not the case for the primary structures at the 3 given addresses. There is one non-contributing accessory building behind the main house on 224 South Meridian Street, and that I think would be eligible for demolition, but the other 3 do not meet that criterion for an exception. And finally, there is the possibility of awarding a COA if it is demonstrated that a contributing historic property can offer no reasonable economic benefit to the owner without being permitted to be demolished. Again, I don't think sufficient evidence has been submitted to verify that there is no potential to reap a reasonable economic benefit from these properties without demolishing them. I think it would be necessary, and the design guidelines corroborate this, to submit comparative pro formas for demolition or preserving and restoring the structures. Those have not been received to my knowledge, and I think they would need to be examined closely in advance of a meeting by commissioners in order for there to be a robust assessment of that claim. Also, kind of last but not least, just dictating decisions of this nature is the 1978 U.S. Supreme Court case of Penn Central versus the City of New York. Now that was a case that involved the proposed demolition of Grand Central Station in New York so that the owners, Penn Central, could take full advantage of development opportunities on the site. And it was ruled in that case that an owner of a property in a historic district is not entitled to a COA for demolition merely because the denial of that COA would prevent them from achieving the highest and best use of their property. There's a burden upon the owner to demonstrate that they can achieve no reasonable or beneficial use from the property without demolition. So that governs all cases. I know we're not talking about Grand Central Station here, but the principles still apply. So those kind of, in a nutshell, are the reasons that I find for denying this petition.
All right. Thank you, Sam. We'll now hear from the applicant in this matter. You can give your name and address for the record, please.
Good evening. My name is Chris Edwards. My local address is 12543 Marina View Drive, Indianapolis, Indiana, 46256. In addition to myself, I have a team with me this evening. Let me just take a moment and introduce folks. On the end, the smiling face with the beard is Nick North. You probably know him from Midwest Homes here in Lebanon. Next is Lisa Batts. She's my local real estate agent. In between those folks, in the back row is Jeremy Stewart. Jeremy is from the Curran Architecture Group. And then my lovely wife and co-investor, Christina Edwards, next there. So I think the crux of the issue is around can we rehab these buildings? Was that part of the scope of what we considered when we went forward? And then how does that fit into the overall plan that I have for the space? So Lisa and I and Nick, we toured each of the locations, the 3 multifamily buildings. And if we can maybe turn on the overhead here. I don't know if we can zoom out a little bit, but.
Here you go, Chris.
Oh, thank you.
Zoom.
Great. Perfect.
And if you want to turn the light back on, that helps.
This is a fancier one than I'm used to. Okay, so these are the 3 structures. So as we toured these buildings, I had a prime path to go in and do preservation and rehabbing. That was the plan. And then I'll get into my plan and vision for the 320 South Meridian property, which coincidentally was in a bid this evening to be submitted by, I think, 5:30 and into the city council. So that adjacent space that's just south of these properties is part of our overall plan. So went into this hoping to preserve and rehab. And I'll invite Lisa and Nick to come up and give their opinions as well. But in the first room of this first building on 224 South Meridian, I stopped taking notes about things that I needed to do in order to rehab the building up to a level where kind of my benchmark is would I help my daughter move into this property and live there when she wants to move to this area. So just very rough conditions. So you can start at the foundational level, cracks in the foundation, seepage, things like that you would just normally say, well, that's a big issue. We'll come back to that if we fix everything else. Electrical issues, it's vintage electrical panels, wiring, that's pretty heavy lifting in terms of needing to go in and rehab that. There are, in this first building, we were on the first floor and there was a big hole in the ceiling and the owner explained to us that that was probably knocked in the floor so that the first floor tenant can watch the second floor tenant. Just craziness, right? So there are foundational issues that you have to repair in order to move forward and bring these up to standard. So that's just kind of the lay of the land of the properties. But then on top of that, they've been cut up into 3, 4, 5 units apiece. And these are big structures. So kind of in the space of 2,500 square feet up to maybe 4,000 square feet, something in that range. A total across the 3 properties is 10,000 square feet. So as you start thinking about needing to do what I would term a gut rehab, and I think my partners will, they will concur with that as well, I have a very simple approach, and it's really a cost per square foot that I look at when I'm rehabbing properties, and it kind of goes from $30 a square foot up to, call it $70 a square foot. And then if you want to go into specialty historic preservation for the sake of preservation of the community, then it even gets higher. So as I think about that continuum, and you use, let's say, a $30 per square foot baseline, and you multiply that against about a 10,000 square foot set of houses, that gets you into, you're looking at kind of best case about $300,000 or so of CapEx that you would put into the properties, in addition to the $350,000 purchase price for the 3 properties. So when you round that all out, you get to about something in the neighborhood of $225,000 each on average, give or take, given the size. But, and Lisa can speak to this, but as you compare that to market rates for similar type buildings, I mean, you guys know this area, there's not a whole bunch of downtown properties that just jump off the map that they've been bought and sold for $225,000 to maybe $280,000, $300,000 each. So my approach is very simple math. We went in with the hope to restore these to their original grandeur, and it just is not going to happen. It won't happen while I'm doing it anyway. So if you don't mind, I can invite Lisa and Nick to come up and maybe give their thoughts as well. And then
Sure,
I can
that'd be
come up
great.
and talk about some of the other things. Nick or Lisa, both?
Just please again give your name and address for the record, please.
Sure. Good evening, guys. Thank you for your time. My name is Nick North. My address is 4149 Waterthirst Drive, Indianapolis, Indiana. I'm a current local business owner off of 124 South Meridian Street, just right down the same street here that you guys are located at today, and where the future for this project is going to be. Upon my analysis of going through the sites was pretty close to concurrent what Chris was saying. By the second room that I had visually scoped, I quit writing notes. B is that is the level of uneven floors in multiple units, as if you're going to try to take a level to any of these structures. With the compressor, the foundation, it's the old type of mortar foundations, which all wear, and over time, especially being exposed to the outside ground without proper weatherproofing, takes a hold on the structure. So you have the settling of the facilities that are uneven, compared with the breaking and cabbaging of all the electrical supplies, which, in my opinion, when you're looking at a safe place that you would want to rent or live in, it surprises me, even though I know these are weekly rentals, that people live in a weekly rental with such harsh conditions. Coping with that is the bathroom and the kitchen areas without proper water filtration or sanitizing of the water. All those water-fed areas have been covered with rust and lime to a point where the smell is pretty much apparent when you walk in these spaces. One of the spaces was so bad I walked in and walked right out that I couldn't visually stand in the space. So based with my analysis on going through the structures, they're in pretty grave shape. I believe being the facts, when they were single family, they were taken care of, they were properly maintained. But when you break something up from a single family to a multifamily, it's hard to maintain the aesthetic look, historical or not, inside and exterior. So in that regard, that's my analysis on the spaces in there, that it's going to take a grave amount of money to get on back to something that I would want to live in myself, or have somebody within my family or friends want to rent or own those structures. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Lisa Batts, and I have Batts Real Estate Group, 1601 Indianapolis Avenue in Lebanon, and I've been in real estate for 28 years. So Chris had contacted me to kind of get an idea of our community and wanting to help rehab some properties, or, you know, just to get out and help in some of the transition that we're trying to make in Lebanon. But truly went into these properties with our eyes like wide shut, is it, I guess you'd say. I didn't expect what we ran into. I did contact the owner of those 3 properties, and she met us there. But just talking to her led us to believe that they were sound and they were rented, and people living in there, and potential great income. So we thought, well, maybe income for a while until we figure out if we can rehab one at a time. But truly it was like non-disclosure on any of that. It was bad. It is bad. And being just maybe a mom or being a woman, I don't know what it is, but I wanted to like turn around and walk out, because you do have evidence of children living there. You have evidence of people living in unsafe conditions. I'm not trying to like pull any red flags for anybody to like be alerted that something needs to be done, but it's not anything that could be, it's going to take a lot of money. And it is all busted up inside. All of them have probably six to 7 units in the big one. Can't remember, 4 in the first one. The garage, or the shack as we called it, that behind it might be probably the best one, because it's on a slab and it's, you know, it's a garage, you know, somebody's living in. But inside it is, nothing's up to code. There are major safety issues, and I can't even imagine the amount of money. I was trying to look at some property that maybe would help us to see what it could be. I struggled finding it in that area. There's one property on East South Street, which is 32. I think we're probably all familiar with it. It's a big Victorian style home that is now an antique shop, which is a beautiful property. But when he acquired that property, the integrity of that was still intact. He still had beautiful doors and woodwork, and nothing was chopped up. And the amount to bring it up to code or snuff, or to make it like it is today, was minimal compared to these, I guess. So the value, you know, I kind of feel bad that maybe Chris paid as much or offered as much as he did for him, because I'm looking at it now thinking I don't know if it can be done, you know, for rehab. Any questions?
Ms. Batts, in this area, I know we don't have very many homes of that scale. Are there any comps close to it, and what would those run?
The highest one that I found, like I said, was the one on 32, which was about 4 years ago. Actually, it sold, but it did bring 200. But again, I can show you the pictures even if you want to. But the integrity of this home, you know, was still there. I mean, this one is this correct?
Yeah. No, just turn it the same way. Oh.
Turn it this way.
Yeah.
There we go.
So you see that it still has all the natural woodwork and all the open staircases. There was no place you could fall through the floors or anything like that. And definitely there were multiple areas that you had to watch where you were walking in this in each of these buildings. Besides this property, which, like I said, it was at one time sold for $119. The last time it went on the market with some of the renovations was it ended up selling for $200. That was $400. Or 4 years ago, and that was that many years ago. The next one that I could find was on East Superior, and it sold for $112. And I don't know if anyone had the opportunity to be in that property. It was a beautiful property. somebody went in and renovated it. I don't see the ability to get 300,000 out of a single-family home with what you, I mean, you'd have to ask that much to be able to get your money back, I think. Minimal.
Maybe I could just make
Oh, yeah, sure, yes, please.
Yeah, so as I was looking at these photos of the other building that she talked about as the comp, we would not be sitting in this room this evening talking about the first COA if that was the state of these buildings. I am a preservationist. I like old buildings. So I share a lot with Sam from that standpoint, but these are not that, period. And like I said, just if you just think about that continuum that I'm talking about of $30 a square foot up to 70, and you pick a midpoint, add it to the price that I've paid or how you have the properties under contract, that would basically get us to $280,000. It's just economically not feasible. I think that's the simple way of saying this. So. Do you want to see what is contemplated if this COA is approved and we move on to the second COA? Do you want to see that now or in a moment?
Yeah, let's
I have one
decide on
question.
this first.
With the ones that you just purchased, you already own these, the ones you're asking to demolish.
So for clarity, I have them under contract during a due diligence phase, which is kind of standard. So that's what we're doing, and that's why the experts are in the room, because we wanted to make sure that we could move forward.
So demolishing these is not going to bring you any income.
Will not.
So your next phase would be the project you want to put here. That's your future, okay.
Yes, that's correct.
Which is why we need to see what they're talking about, I would think. Will Derek allow that? Can we move from one?
Well, we'll
I
hear.
can spend 1 minute.
Yeah,
just
we'll
give you
hear.
a high level.
Yeah, we can talk about that project.
Sure. So from a, sure.
You know, in the guidelines, it does specify that, you know, demolition should not be speculative as well. So, and I think that meets this criteria. Whether or not you want to hear this right now, and I think you're going to for a little bit, is fine. But I think he's meeting that criteria. If you approve the demolition, he has something coming right behind it. He's not just demolishing the houses, putting them up on the market for sale, and waiting for some better opportunity to come along. So he does have a plan if the demolition COA is approved. So I just wanted to throw that in.
All right, thank you.
So I'll just give the very high level, and then we can cover it at a greater depth in the next COA review. So what is contemplated is a 3-phase project. First phase is a 15,000 square foot mixed-use building. The first floor has about 3,500 square feet of retail office space. The second and third floor and the back of the first floor has 14 apartments. So kind of going back to what Lisa was talking about, my first foray into how can we enter in the Lebanon market and kind of make a difference was talking with Ben Montrager and talking with the mayor about what problems are you trying to solve. So one of the problems that I understand is you have a shortage of housing, particularly apartments and single-family houses, I guess maybe both of those. So I toured all of the apartments that are available here in the area, and I agree with them that you have a shortage and it will hold you back in terms of development. So we started to focus our energies into how can we work together to integrate into the Big Four Trail, what all the great enthusiasm that's going on with that in the planned development, and we jointly got to this point. So as I said, this is a 3-phase development. This is the first phase. Then there's basically a duplicate property that would sit at 310 and 304 South Meridian. So that would be another 15,000, another 14 apartments, another 3,500 square feet of retail office space. And then in relation to that, there's also at 224, that property after demolition would be turned into a parking lot of about 24 spaces that would support the proposed buildings as well as the general community. So sorry, I went a little bit deeper on that than I wanted to, but that's the essence of the property.
All right. All right, thank you, Mr. Edwards. Any questions for the applicant at this time? All right. If there's anyone from the public who would like to comment on this project at this time, they can step to the microphone. All right, seeing no one from the public, we'll close the public comment on this application. Yeah, it's a tough project I think it's a tough decision from the standpoint of a lot of things that Sam mentioned. Some of the criteria. I think the applicant did bring up some good points, or I should say brought up some points that may speak a little bit to that economic viability, or maybe a lack of with the conditions of the property.
We hate to tear down historic properties, but in 10 years, if they're not taken care of and they fall in any way, what's the benefit there for the district and the city too? So I see it both ways.
Yeah.
I think a lot of the historic part of it has already been destroyed. And so there's not much at this point to save on those buildings when they're gutted and things are destroyed and demoed and cut up into different sections. It's extremely difficult, I'm sure, as you guys can agree to rehab one residence structure that's been divided and destroyed. I also hate to see a historic building go, having our business in a historic building downtown. But with this proposed project, I think it has a greater benefit to the community to bring that together versus trying to rehab an older section. So I'm in favor of moving forward with this demolition, which is surprising to me. I didn't think I would be the one advocating for demolition of technically a historic building, but when you look at these structures and look what the proposal is in depth, I think it has a greater promise than what rehabbing or attempting to rehab, especially when you look at the cost. Did you happen to get any cost with a proposal cost of those remodels, or?
That was the next.
Can you step to the microphone, just so we can hear you a little clearer? Thank you.
I talk kind of loud. That was the next step in the project plan, is to go through kind of a rigorous assessment of what we needed to do, then put some costs next to that, and then put an implementation plan. But like I said, we got to the first room and we're like, okay, let's stop taking notes. So to answer your question, no.
I feel for Casey and me too. And yet I've been involved in enough reconstruction of older homes, and I love it, to know that you see these homes from the outside with the pillars, with the structure, with the shape, although probably asbestos underneath somewhere, and then to walk in and see what you ran into. Once they're divided and split up, they're pretty destroyed. I had a staircase that they just cut the wall right through. Anyway, and Sam, totally going against your opinion, I know, but I think we're all leaning towards the same way, that for Lebanon, for our future.
I'm still sort of on the fence here.
Are you?
Yeah.
I'm not trying to speak for you. This is tough. It's a tough decision for what we're trying to accomplish in Lebanon. I think what the proposal is better than what we're looking at today.
Can we answer why this was a contributing building? What criteria makes it that sea level?
Is that to Derek?
Sam or Derek?
Is it just the age of the building?
Well, I question that as well. Sam is the one to probably answer that better than I am. So.
Yeah, I mean, they there's kind of an eye test that it doesn't seem to pass, but again, that's not, I know that's not the only criteria, certainly.
I wouldn't have guessed the age, actually.
Sure, I'm not sure what specifically resulted in these buildings being classified as contributing, but I think we can get at it by looking back at the definition given for a contributing structure. The first criterion is that it's at least 40 years old, which these certainly meet, but it does not meet the criteria for a notable or outstanding rating. But it's also stated in the definition that these resources are important to the density or continuity of an area's historic fabric. And these structures, although they exhibit some deterioration, do continue to contribute to the density and continuity of the historic district. If they are lost, that density and continuity will also be lost. I would add a few things. It hasn't seemed to come up, but I'm not sure if this is also leading then to an application for funding through the RDC's grant program, but public funding is often intended to cover a gap in a pro forma that could not be met through private investment alone. And it can help to make a project viable that would not otherwise be viable. And if the city is willing to provide funding to tear down 3 historic buildings and replace them, why not ask the city to provide funding to cover the gap in the pro forma for rehabilitating these buildings instead? Indiana Landmarks has seen and carried many properties through restorations, and those properties looked far worse than the 3 that are being considered right now. If there were some additional assistance to cover the gap currently in the budget for the project, maybe that could help to make it economically viable to rehabilitate and preserve rather than demolish and replace. So just food for thought, I guess. And one last point is that while there are 3 exceptions that justify the Historic Preservation Commission awarding a COA for demolition, one of them is not to relieve an owner or prospective owner from a bad investment. I think it's still upon the owner to demonstrate probably more formally that this project would not be economically viable with rehabilitation rather than demolition and new construction. And I will just read one quote too from the decision in the Penn Central versus the City of New York case. And that is that the submission that property owners may establish a taking simply by showing that they've been denied the ability to exploit a property interest that they heretofore had believed was available for development is quite simply untenable. So that's the Supreme Court's take on that situation. I obviously don't question the good intentions of the prospective developer in this case, but I think the other points that I just listed do need to be taken into account.
Another question, Sam. Sorry.
Sure.
Talk to me about the density aspect of property.
Absolutely. Right now, there are, early 20th century single-family homes. Now, the fact that these particular 3 houses have been subdivided into apartment units might increase the population density per unit, but they don't change the density in terms of ground coverage by buildings within that block of the district. Demolishing 3 existing historic houses on a primarily residential block of single-family homes is going to alter the density on the ground with respect to the actual footprints of buildings. I think that's the main thing that should be considered now. I mean, you can also consider the fact that new construction would change the density as well, probably in terms of population and certainly in terms of footprint and, you know, the ratio of building footprint to unbuilt area in that block of the district. But I think that the chief concern now should not be what comes after these buildings are demolished, but simply the demolition itself and the impact on the contributing historic structures.
Thank you, Sam.
Are there any thoughts or plans on the existing house that's not under the contract that you currently have, the one that's not contracted?
Sorry, could you repeat your question?
Do you have any intentions or ambitions to acquire that house that's not within the scope of this project?
Okay. Yes, so the house that's not in scope is 234 South Meridian. And I have been in contact via Lisa and I guess directly with the owner and have talked to them about selling that property as well because that fits nicely into this overall development. And that would be integral to a third phase, that third phase that I described, and it would actually provide a little bit more footprint so that you could have kind of a triplicate of what we're talking about now across that area.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
All right, gentlemen and lady, any other comments, questions, thoughts before we move to the motion phase?
It's almost like you're killing a old relative.
Yeah. I mean, this is probably one of the toughest, I think, applications we've had, just from that standpoint of because we've not taken. I don't think we've had a demolition come before this board before, and again, there's a. I guess our role is it's kind of twofold. I guess one we're looking at preserving, I think the historic nature or preserving the district, but at the same time, and I think it's been alluded to here that if it stays as it is, then what is it 5-10 years down the road? So there's a little bit of preservation and that may have to come at the cost of these buildings to preserve the quality of the district.
Can you sorry. Can you talk to me, and I know this is more related to the next one, about timetable. So say you demo tomorrow, what's the next step of the future? Because I sure hate to see more empty lots around downtown also.
Yeah, so our intent would be to move as rapidly as we can. So one of the specialties that Nick has with Midwest Homes is he deploys, I'm going to call them factory-based houses. So if you think about cities of the future, they're going to be built in a factory where the weather's perfect, the plumbers are there, the electrician's there, and so on and so forth. And then they come to site, and then they're very quickly assembled. It's very common on East and West Coast in the States, and then elsewhere in the world, very common. So our approach would be kind of tie up all the permitting, negotiation phase, go through development plan, acceptance, and then right after that, then Nick and I would work to finalize the designs. I would place the order, it would be built in the factory, and then what we've talked about with the planning department is, I think effectively we need about 14 days, call it 3 weeks, round it up a little bit, about 3 weeks to assemble what we're getting ready to talk to. So in terms of construction time, it's very quick for the mass. And then what happens is you probably have a trailing, call it 2 or 3 months, where you're putting up the roof and you're getting the patios put on, you're doing the masonry work, you're putting in the HVAC, those type of things. So in terms of typical construction of such a large building, this is about half. So my intent in doing that is let's help solve the housing crisis that is probably out there for apartments. So that's one reason I'm going this route. And then it's very green. These are going to be not LEED certified, but I could put them in for LEED certification. So super green and efficient. Did that answer your question?
It does. And I realize that's sort of irrelevant to the demo COA, but
Well,
curiosity.
Not at all, right, I agree, because it's tough to demolish these guys and then to not know for sure what's going to take their place. It could be worse. But the design that you have shown us, that we've seen, something like that.
Yes.
We're not going to be shocked and it's going to be totally
Purple?
different, no. But the dental and all that will be part of the building, and it's brick. You talk about it being built in a factory, but the facade will be brick.
Yes.
Okay.
So Nick's team would do the masonry work
And I know
on
that's
site?
the next, but it's still
Yeah.
difficult to make a decision not knowing.
I don't know if this is completely left field, and if it is, just laugh me right out of here, but could we potentially approve the design first of what that proposal is, and then once our board is happy with what this is going to be, then move forward with the demolition? That way we are 100% comfortable knowing what is going to be on place rather than what may be, and having to go back and with those design efforts.
So that question may not have been posed to me, but I'll throw
Sure.
in my 2 cents. The due diligence timeline that I talked about will expire in June. So in order to be able to make a decision, do I want to move forward with these properties, these 3 properties that we're talking about now, or not? It's like stacked up in terms of decisions. So I think this meeting is where this decision has to take place in order to kind of stay in my overall timeline. So that's kind of the timeline comment. The other part is you have my commitment, it's going to look like this. So we may haggle about, you know, how big is the sign on the front of the property, but the intent of putting these designs forward and working with Jeremy and working with the planning department is it's materially similar to this. I'm not going to change it. So.
I think Mr. North, I think you wanted to make a comment, and then Sam, I know you said you wanted to say something as well.
Yeah, I had a couple of things that came up in my thoughts. First, I know one thing is I come from old school Zionsville, still when it was small, so keeping that hometown preservation is big to me, even though I'm a single family building owner and do small scale commercial projects. So in a way of seeing something that I walk by almost every day when I walk my dog down to the area is kind of difficult in a way, seeing old things disappear and new reformity come along. On the tops to that is the fact is, one thing he talked about density and conformity. One thing we have coming through is this Big 4 trail coming down there with all the TIF dollars that were set aside to bring this new revitalization down through the street there. One is my business is right in front of this, taking a part of this new money coming down through to help bring in more clients, new people to this community and the growth that it's at. So on the conformity side, I'm just want to know is the structures that are there, there's what's conforming to what's coming down into the 4% that it holds compared to what the structure that we're willing to present to put there and what it can do for the community. I weigh both hand in hand a lot, but when I look at where my kids can do in a city that I believe is on the ups and on the coming to really grow and position itself for the next 10 to 20 years is big. And another thing to Mr. Burgess is we asked about, or you made a comment about the demo cost. We know what the demo cost is going to be for those 3 projects. I don't know if today's the meeting to delineate that out to you guys, but it's only about 5% of the total value cost of what Mr. Edwards has talked about investing for the project. So with that, the amount that's even willing to help for demo is such a small minute cost that it won't get to where it needs to be able to make that initial investment for those structures to be somewhat obtainable and overall their density space and their conformity to preservation or historical views of this city. So that's what I wanted to say.
All right, thank you. Sam?
I have 2 points to add, the first of which ends in a question. When I was looking at these plans with my supervisor at Indiana Landmarks, Mark DeLacy, one thing that he noted was that there are 2 phases proposed for the project, one of which is on a site that currently has no historic buildings within the district, and the other of which has 3 historic buildings in the district. Now, phase 1 is the phase that would require the demolition of 3 structures, while what is currently denoted as phase 2 does not require the demolition of any structures. So the question is why the phase that requires the demolition of 3 structures is supposed to come before the one that does not require any demolitions of historic structures in the district. As kind of a follow-up question, why could phase 2 not be built first and approved first? There are a lot of real estate development projects that are intended to have 2 phases, but for one reason or another, whether it's unanticipated economic hardship or changing markets, the second phase never gets built. So why not start by building on the site that doesn't require the demolition of historic structures, and then if it still looks like the project has potential to be doubled in area and capacity, then revisit the possibility of demolition for the 3 structures in question. The other point I have in response to the statement that these new buildings would be green is that it's very difficult to construct a truly green building when it requires the demolition of an existing historic building. The National Trust for Historic Preservation has an initiative called Preservation Green Lab. It's very research focused. They've done the most cutting edge research available in the nation on kind of what constitutes green architecture and what constitutes green preservation. And what they've discovered is that even assuming that a new building uses half the energy that an existing historic building uses, it would take 30 years to begin to offset the energy wasted by demolishing the historic building on that site. So the whole LEED certification system is flawed in cases of demolition and new construction on already developed sites because it doesn't take into account the energy cost of and loss of demolishing and putting into a landfill a historic structure. Now that's not really something addressed in the design guidelines or the historic preservation ordinance, but I did want to offer that in response to the statements about LEED certification.
Thank you, Sam. Mr. Edwards, can you address the phase question that Mr. Burgess brought up?
Yeah, sure. So I guess two points on that. One is, in order to put up the proposed structure on the 320 South Meridian site, so that's the site that the city owns and it doesn't have any developments on today. In order to be able to get that approved, the necessary parking that would support that is being fulfilled by the demolition of 224, partly fulfilled by the demolition of 224 building. So if you skip the demolition completely, I don't think the development plan would be approved because you wouldn't have that incremental parking that you're getting associated with the space of 224. So that's like the academic answer. The I guess the real answer on why it can't work to just flip-flop those is I won't move forward with the purchase of buildings that I know are, if they're not unsafe, in quotes, then they're really close to being unsafe. I'm not going to buy that. I don't like the liability. I don't like being associated with people living like that. I'm not going to do that. So hopefully that's clear. I like the idea of being able to do that, but it's not feasible because then you would have to dump that $300,000 in there in order to get those up to a safe level. So.
Can I ask Sam a question? Sam, if, and I don't think you have, just by the way this came about, if you were to walk through these buildings internally, do you think it would be possible for your mind to change by what you've heard them say?
I did at least indirectly request the opportunity to look through the buildings before the meeting, and I would certainly embrace that opportunity. I would be most comfortable seeing the assessment of a professional building inspector. I think that more than anything is what would.
But hearing what they have said about it being chopped up, 7 units in one, and holes in the floor, and just imagining how they get 7 units out of a staircase going up, which probably originally had at least the one home. That's how I look at it. That how do you feasibly look at the interior and not think, wow, I couldn't buy this and I couldn't make it work because I love the outside, but the inside is just not workable?
You know, there are a lot of large homes from that era that have been subdivided into apartment units or, you know, other uses over time and converted back into their original uses as single-family homes. You know, there are many successes. If you look at Indianapolis's Old North Side or here in Morton Place, I mean, a lot of those American Four Squares and, you know, Victorian Queen Anne homes were subdivided into many units, especially, you know, around the time of the Great Depression, but have since been turned back into single-family homes. So that part alone, I don't think would convince me that a building could not be turned back into a single-family home. And I think it's also possible that buildings like this could be turned into, you know, fewer apartment units too. Maybe not weekly rentals, but, you know, maybe some nice flats or something along those lines. So those are possibilities that have been realized in many other highly distressed historic homes that have been cut up. Not having seen the floor in person or knowing a building inspector's assessment or an engineer's assessment, I have no idea whether those details would make a building unviable. You know, I think there are certain types of damage that can be repaired and don't necessarily mean that a structure needs to come down or that it's a threat to safety or health.
Mr. Edwards, when is your option up or the contract?
The due diligence phase
Yes, sir.
is completed as of June 10th.
June 10th.
But like I said, in terms of the number of things to get done between now and June 10th, in order to have a bank say, yeah, I also agree with this, and I'm willing to underwrite, it becomes difficult.
Right.
So.
If there are no other questions, I think we probably need to move on this, and I will entertain a motion, one way or the other, on the COA for the demolition.
Go ahead, Casey.
Well, let's preface this, that when I took this position on the board, I never imagined to do, to take down a historic building. And Sam, I've listened to every word that you've said, and I appreciate it. You know, I would have liked to have probably been able to see more exact numbers. But in other walks of life, I've seen these houses, and I know what they have, and I'm fully comfortable in moving forward with approving a demolition. So I'd officially make a motion to approve the COA as requested.
Do we have a second?
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second. Christie, will you take the roll, please?
Casey Sampson.
Aye.
George Piper.
Aye.
Chad Wheat.
Aye.
Linda Ridgway.
Aye.
All right, motion carries 4-0. All right, thank you. We will next move forward to the COA request for the proposal for 3 new mixed use development to be located at 224, 304, 310, and 320 South Meridian Street. We'll hear again from staff on this one before we hear from the applicant.
Well, I really don't know what I can add to what you've already heard, but I will tell you that the applicant and staff in the planning department, specifically myself in this case, have worked from a first submittal to the submittal that you see before you. And the applicant has added several features to the buildings, to the structures that may not satisfy certain historians in architectural terms, but you know, infill has been a difficult thing to define. I think anybody who was around for the flats experiment recognizes that, and you know, one of the things that stuck out to me in that process was that you certainly don't want to try to recreate history. I think you have to have a good mix of quality materials that contribute to the district. But to design something that looks like one of our buildings around the square, I don't think is the purpose. So in this case, you'll find you know, and Sam will probably touch on this a little bit, some conflicting architectural elements that are from different periods. But I do feel like they're quality buildings, and I do feel like the applicant has done a very nice effort in adding some of those quality materials around the building. The original submittal did not have brick all the way around the structure, and no matter how you slice this up currently, those structures are visible on all 4 sides from certain vantage points. So we felt like it was important to have those brick elements added to all 4 sides. Sorry, let me get back to my notes here real quick. Some of the other elements that have been added in my staff report, you'll see the breakdown of the units and how the inside of the structure works. That's not necessarily of great importance here. The first floor apartments, while discouraged, if they are going to be there, they should be ADA accessible, and these units are ADA accessible. The building is, again, a mix of brick, painted cement board siding, and painted wood. The applicant has added a significant amount of brick, enhanced the windows throughout from the original proposal, added design features to the porches, such as double posts, enhanced the cast stone that is on the structure, and in addition added stone sills and lintels to all the windows that now have brick along with them. The roof line, the height of the building, as mentioned, fits in roughly with some of our other commercial buildings in the district. Very similar to this building, just a scotch taller than this building and just a little bit less in height compared to the flats. The other commercial buildings in the actual same block would be the Estes Building, the old Cedars Motel, which is right there. And the Cedars Motel is very consistent to the height of what these proposed structures are. You know, I wanted to get some sort of real number for you on the height of the existing structures. And those homes there currently are of a pretty good height. There's no doubt about it. I couldn't get an exact number for you, but they're somewhere in this range. So the height of what you see that will replace these buildings isn't going to be that much different. So again, it'll be consistent with the commercial structure. So the middle section of the building, the retail side of the building will have a 0 setback from the right-of-way, which would be consistent with most of the commercial structures in the district. So it's kind of a small overview there. You have the pictures that were in your packet, so you can see some of the more detail of what I just spoke about.
All right. Thank you, Derek. And Sam, you want to give your reports as well?
Sam Burgess again. Let's see. My overall recommendation is not to approve this proposal as submitted, but I do think it has potential to meet the standards for the district with some further revisions. So I do want to go through kind of what revisions I think would be necessary in order to help the proposal meet standards for the district. I'm going to start. I've structured my staff report according to what is in the ordinance, historic preservation ordinance for the city regarding new construction, infill construction within the historic district. And I guess I should start by saying that I've used the ordinance rather than the design guidelines because, well, the design guidelines present strong suggestions. What is contained in the ordinance is binding. And according to the ordinance, any new construction in the district must fulfill 11 criteria for visual compatibility with the historic resources in the district. Now, the first criterion for visual compatibility is height, compatibility with the height of existing contributing historic structures. And I'll add that most of the comparisons I'm making are with historic commercial buildings in the district and not residential buildings. And it should be noted that those buildings were historically mixed use, just as the proposed buildings would be of a mixed use. In terms of height, I agree that the proposed buildings are compatible with historic buildings in the district, although they are probably not compatible in height with the immediate context, which again contains single-family houses. The second criterion for visual compatibility deals with the proportion of a building's front facade. I think overall the proposed buildings do satisfy that criterion. There's a central section, it's kind of a tripartite main facade, and that central section is wider than it is tall, and many of the historic commercial buildings in the district are taller than they are wide, but there are enough examples, and I'll just put this up here for reference, the main east-facing elevation on South Meridian Street. I think there are enough, buildings that have a predominantly horizontal orientation in the district that it's reasonable to include that kind of a detail on this design. The next criterion for visual compatibility is proportion of openings within the facility. I will mention that the Historic Preservation Ordinance does allow for taking style into consideration when you're evaluating infill. It says that the purpose of historic preservation is advanced through the restoration and preservation of historic areas and buildings, the construction of compatible new buildings where appropriate, and the maintenance and insurance of compatibility in regards to style, form, proportion, texture, material, etc. So I think it is worthwhile and legitimate to talk a little bit about style. There is, as Derek mentioned, a bit of a mixing of styles in this design. It shows kind of a cornice that is trying to look a bit like the Italianate buildings in the district, but nothing else really has any resemblance to the Italianate buildings in the district. Italianate buildings have characteristically long attenuated windows. These openings are more of a double square proportion for the single windows and a very, dominantly horizontal proportion for the double windows. So, if this building is trying to be compatible with the Italianate buildings, then those window openings should probably be elongated. And if it's not trying to be compatible with those Italianate buildings, then the pseudo-Italianate cornice should probably be eliminated from the design. And I would specify that as a contingency for the approval of the COA. The next criterion is the relationship of solids to voids in front facades. And in general, I think that the proposal meets that criterion, but there are some exceptions. I would say the main exception, if we can cut back to the elevation, is the design for the second and third story porches on the corners. Those create a very large void not seen on any intact historic commercial or mixed-use buildings in the district. So that's a pretty substantial point of incompatibility. Most historic commercial buildings in the historic district have very solid corners. There's not a void there, but a strong solid element. Here is a typical example. Most load-bearing masonry buildings have to have a solid corner to stand. So that's a strong characteristic of buildings of a similar category that I think should be observed in the design of infill buildings in the district. I think there are some possible remedies for that situation in the design. I think there are two major possibilities. One, I think, would be to keep the porches where they are and make them more solid looking. And that could be done by replacing what is now fiber cement on the proposed posts at the corners with solid masonry material, same as the brick elsewhere on the facades, and potentially doing the same with the railings. Here's an example within the district of a multi-story apartment building. I think it's the only comparable and applicable example in the district. And this has very solid brick piers at the corners that counteract the effect of having voids near the corners. It also has basically a brick parapet wall with a stone coping instead of a railing that looks more fitting for a suburban context than the small town but still urban context of the district. There's another alternative. It's a bit dark, but still using wood on the railings, but I don't know if I can zoom in at all. Using a more solid wall of wood under the railings. And this is a Craftsman example from downtown Indianapolis. A lot of the details of this proposed design are actually much more akin to the Craftsman style than the Italianate style. So I think it would actually be much more appropriate to the design to have either a solid parapet wall or a more solid looking balustrade with broad-faced balusters of simple wood, and these are very inexpensive and easy to execute too. They don't require a lot more design money or craftsmanship. But if you squint, at least you can see that these have little geometric cutouts in them that add some interest and character. Finally, is the idea of kind of flip-flopping the locations of the bedroom and utility wings and the locations of the corner porches, so that the corner porches would actually be on the side. So porch would move from here to here and here to here. That way you retain the feature. There's not much reconfiguration required. You end up with kind of a side loggia, and that gets rid of the whole issue of weakening the corner and having a void, and also, you know, having just with respect to kind of the reality of having residential balconies, maybe not having people's stuff out there visible on South Meridian Street. Now, I know you would be going from having two sides that are exposed to having only one that's exposed, but you know, maybe a skylight could be introduced back here. And that way you could still retain the selling point of having that balcony, but get it off of the main facade and make the main facade more compatible with comparable buildings in the district.
Sam?
Yes.
Wouldn't you showed the 404 North Lebanon, would that be an alternate design to what you just showed us? I mean, if they did something similar to 404 North Lebanon, that satisfy what you're talking about?
I think it would. I think so. I think if I can go back, I think it might be helpful to look at that again. If we can. Yes. I think a lot of those features would be a very good inspiration. I think this is probably one of the best analogs for this infill proposal that could be found in the district. And I think studying it and not duplicating it exactly or trying to create a sense of false history, but still picking up on its defining features and working some of those into the design could vastly improve its visual compatibility with the district. All right. Next criterion for visual compatibility, I'll try to keep this as brief as possible, is the rhythm of spacing of buildings on streets. I think the very fact of demolishing historic buildings is going to disrupt the rhythm of buildings on the immediate block in a big way, and it's going to be hard to put up a mixed-use 3-story building that spans 2 parcels in the place of demolished historic houses and create visual compatibility with respect to the rhythm of spacing of buildings on the streets. So that's, I think, a criterion that's going to be just very difficult to meet with this proposal. Rhythm of entrances and porch projections. Don't have a whole lot to add to what I've already said about the porches. One note on the entrances on the ground floor. is that, well, I think it is a strong feature of the design that there is some recess of part of the storefront from the face of the building. You don't see any examples of historic buildings, commercial buildings in the district where the entire storefront is recessed from the main face of the building. And I think that's something that needs to be remedied in this design to establish visual compatibility.
So most of the historical buildings, commercial buildings, the doors are recessed, but not the shop windows.
Exactly. Yeah, typically you have a recessed door. You might have, a couple of canted shop windows, or, at least one next to the door, flanking the door. But then the main shop windows are typically flush with the plane of the facade. There's an example in the design guidelines. Don't seem to be finding at the moment, but the design guideline, here it is, actually. It's getting really washed out, unfortunately. But it's page 12 of the design guidelines. I would recommend taking a look at that. And, it shows exactly what we're discussing, where those shop windows need to come up to the same plane as the masonry face of the facade. And then you can recess the front doors. The next criterion for visual compatibility is the relationship of materials, texture, and color on the proposed new construction to the contributing historic structures in the district. I think to the extent that this building would employ masonry, it would be visually compatible with comparable mixed use and commercial historic structures in the district. Although I do think it's important for the commission to see a sample in person of the material that would be used. And I know that a photo of the intended masonry was submitted with the petition, but I think it's important to see it in person to make that kind of a judgment, because it's not just material but texture that you're looking at, and texture can vary significantly on brick. Now, the use of fiber cement siding, I think, is wholly incompatible with the district, especially to the extent that this proposal should really be compared with commercial historic buildings within the historic district. You don't see any kind of, lapped clapboard siding on the commercial buildings on the square, with the exception of the Net Tech building, which should not be treated as a precedent. It's a non-contributing building. It's been altered beyond recognition, so you need to look at the contributing buildings that still maintain their character. And really, that's just not a material or a type of texture that's seen on historic buildings in the district. Also, fiber cement is really not a tested material. There have been some questions about, what the existing buildings would look like in 5 or 10 years if they're allowed to stay there. But I think the commission needs to be equally concerned about what this building is going to look like in 5 or 10 or 20 years if it's built as proposed. And if it's not built with quality materials, it's not going to look any better than what's already there. So to invest in the long-term quality of place and value of the community, it's very important to make sure that quality materials compatible with the district are used throughout the exterior of this project, which is why I would make a COA contingent upon applying brick, not just where it's already shown, but on most, if not all, of the sections where fiber cement siding is currently shown. Here, again, that feature and that material is something that's visually compatible with a suburban apartment complex, but not with the downtown Lebanon Commercial Historic District.
Can I ask Sam a question?
Yeah.
Sam, while we're on this, rather than
Yes.
jump and go back with that picture, if we can put it back, where you talked about the siding.
Yes.
Would you be more pleased if it was more like a stucco look?
I think there's potential for that. I think it would have to be very carefully selected. I think it would have to be of quality and a texture that is truly going to be compatible with a historic district that developed in the late 19th and early 20th centuries.
Even if it had an appearance of stone, some of the facades you can get are not real stone because of the structure. It'd have to be totally changed. But as opposed to the siding, whatever word you use for it, I'm thinking maybe if it was stucco look or stone look, you would be happier?
I don't know about stone. I don't know if there's really anything comparable to that in the district, but I think stucco there is. And I'll go back to the North Lebanon Street example. Just a moment. Although there's a lot of brick, and consider the fact that the facade that's turned to the main street is all brick. But if you look at the center section of this kind of barbell plan, which is also a more typical form for the district than the proposal we're seeing, you do see stucco here. And I think it would be important to study the texture of that stucco and other stuccos in the district. There are stuccos that would be very appropriate, and others that I think would be wholly inappropriate to the district. If you wouldn't want to put on the same thing that you would put on a suburban house or a strip mall, or you wouldn't want to put ephes on that kind of looks like stucco. So I think there would need to be contingencies in the COA approval that the petitioner would work with staff to select a stucco that would be appropriate to the district. But I do think that would be more appropriate. And this is not just my opinion, this is my interpretation of the design guidelines and the city's ordinance, as with all the points I'm making. I think that would be more appropriate than fiber cement siding. Just a few more criteria here. The next one I think is very important, and that is visual compatibility with roof shapes in the district. And again, I think this warrants comparison with the historic commercial buildings in the historic district. And I would strongly argue that the cornice of a building and any parapet on a building contributes to its roof shape and should be considered under this category. The cornice in the proposed design just isn't visually compatible with the Italianate cornices that it's trying to assert similarity with. You've had it in your packet, but I'll just put this up again for comparison. Try to cut the glare here as much as possible. So here's above and below the a typical historic Italianate cornice in the district, and then what's being proposed. There are a lot of details that are just not compatible. At the very top, it's kind of hard to see, but where you have down here basically a triple fascia at the top, which you never see on a historic cornice. You have a properly articulated historic Italianate cornice in the district that has one simple fascia molding in the center, but then at the top is a terminating element. It's a cymatium, and the design guidelines talk about needing to have a proper terminating element at the top of a design. So, I think kind of a cartoon version of an Italianate cornice is not visually compatible with the real historic Italianate cornices in the district, and I think those details need to be studied more to make this cornice visually compatible with its analogs in the district if the project is built with it. But I did see an earlier version of the design that just had a simple cap at the top. And while I don't know that that necessarily is visually compatible with what's in the district, I think it's closer. I would recommend making a few refinements to that design just to make it more compatible with some of the commercial vernacular historic buildings in the district. This, I know it doesn't really show detail at the scale that you would want to really analyze it, but that coping at the very top of the parapet in this version of the design comes close to what you see in the district, but I think it would need some tweaking to shed water. And I think it would be good to set that as a contingency too. If the design is going to have that feature, it should be modified to be more compatible with what you see in the district. And just one last point about the roof lines. It's the way the parapet is designed from the side and the cornice. Whenever you're evaluating an infill project, especially when you're not just sticking it in between a couple of existing buildings, it's really important to evaluate it as a three-dimensional object and not just look at the two-dimensional facade designs. Here, in the proposal, there's a cornice that stops very abruptly, and this will be visible as it is from the street. Above is an example of a building in the district that was intended all along to be visible from the street, not only on its front, but also on its side. And you see that the parapet is gradually stepped down from front to back as the height decreases. I think that's a feature that needs to be added to this design. Wall of continuity deals with having a continuous plane, which is typical of the urban streetscapes of Lebanon. Usually there's not a lot of change in plane from one storefront to the next. They're all on the same plane, whereas the design for this proposal has a couple of planes that recede from the main central plane. That is a deviation from what is typical of the district. And I think to create more of a wall of continuity, it might make more sense to bring these planes into unity with each other, or at least have them closer to being the same plane. Almost done. Scale of the building. I think the scale is compatible with the commercial historic buildings in the district, but it is clearly not of the same scale as the buildings on the immediate block. And I think the only way to really resolve that would be to, either rehabilitate the existing buildings or put something up in their place that would be on the same scale, and, rather than having them unified in one building, maybe having a couple of separate buildings where the two houses were, and having those be on a similar scale to what they replaced. Directional expression of the front elevation. I think it is very appropriate that this version or that this phase of the proposal faces the main street that it fronts. So it faces South Meridian Street. My analysis of the Phase 2 proposal is more or less the same, apart from the fact that I think it would be more appropriate for Phase 2 also to face South Meridian Street if possible. So my ultimate recommendation is not to approve a COA for this as submitted. I do think it has a long way to go before it meets the binding standards for infill in the Historic Preservation Ordinance. Again, these are not my standards. These are Lebanon standards that I'm applying to this particular case. But I do think that it has potential to be revised and to come back before the commission, and I think this has potential to contribute to the quality of the district with some changes. So thank you for listening. I know it was a very long analysis, but I do think it's important to really look at the details, because when you look at infill in other communities, it's the failure to get the details right that results in a poor product and degrades the quality of districts and areas outside of historic districts.
All right, thank you, Sam. All right, we'll hear now from the applicant, Mr. Edwards. If you can step to the microphone, please.
Sure. So a lot of feedback. I think a couple things that we can do this evening is Jeremy is here and he did bring bricks with him. So if we want to look at the bricks, we can. And then I think we can talk a little bit about some of the other points that are mentioned.
Okay.
One just very easy one that I can do without much feedback with Jeremy is if we do like the original cornice, kind of the brick structure at the top, we can go back to that. We had added this Italian style cornice based on some preliminary feedback. So we were trying to, work within the team's feedback and to make it a little bit better. So if we want to return and then tweak that, then yeah, we were certainly happy with that. But Jeremy, do you want to come up and field a few of the points?
Yeah, sure. You can start with the window over there.
My name's Jeremy Stewart with Current Architecture, 5719 Lawton Loop, Suite 212, Indianapolis. And so what you've got there in front of you is the proposed brick, which does have some texture and relief to it. It's not a flat brick as you sometimes see. As Chris mentioned with one of the big comments from Sam was the cornice, and we did have an alternate version with a simplified cornice. And I would agree with the assessment that the building is more of a craftsman style, and that was kind of the original goal of the building. The revised cornice that we have that's got the more dental molding, we weren't trying to mimic an Italianate. We're trying to add a little bit of detail with some craftsman detailing in that cornice. So that's why there's an incompatibility when you're comparing it to Italianate. It's not Italianate. It's a dental molding done with some craftsman detailing. So that was the goal on that portion. The setback of the storefront is one of the other comments. One of the reasons we've done that is for future use of the tenant space, understanding that this is a speculative retail building. There isn't an occupied office or retail component yet. If we limit where the door is, it'll forever be there, and that may limit potential leasability of that space. So that's why we've left that whole facade of glass available for door placement. If a tenant really requires the movement, they don't have to tear the whole thing out and start over. And then that still gives them a coverage at that door. And another comment was regarding the columns and extending that with brick and possibly having a brick railing. One of the things you see in historic buildings, the brick railing looks great. We can't do that to code. Those were down here, 30 inches. We're up here at 42 now in order to meet code. Proportionally, that wouldn't look right. I would agree that if we continued with a more opaque railing, we could design in a more detailed opaque railing as opposed to just the standard balusters that we've got that I think could meet the intent that Sam was discussing in terms of creating more of a solid on those corners. And then, so the roof shapes and continuing that, if you look through your packet, you've kind of got an aerial looking down where the parapet stops short. The way this building is structured is that all those roofs are working together and shedding together. Historically, the buildings were built as more of a shotgun style. They weren't as wide, and that's why you had that parapet continue down the length of the building. We don't have that situation here. If we did it, we would be structuring just a parapet to carry brick for the sake of carrying brick. It would be incredibly costly to do that, but you do see in the original historic area, the decorative portion is on the front, and then they stopped it and they go simplified on the sides. We still have the decorative portion on the front is what we're trying to do here. And it is in the center where we have the sides of the building, we do continue that cornice all the way around. And then, are there any other specific items you wanted me to?
What about the realignment of the porches that Sam mentioned, or at least not having them on the front of the building?
If we were to flip them, they would be dark, skinny porches, and at that case, they would be completely unusable. By having them in the corners, they're open and usable to the tenants. It would actually be better in that case to have no porches and just eliminate them.
And did you say on the railings you'd be amenable to something that would be a little more of a solid feature potentially?
Yeah. So he showed this this building here from Heron Morton. These railings here, where it's more opaque, it's still a wood product, but we can get it more decorative and solid, so that we're getting that solid feel on the corner that I think the comment was addressing.
And then also Sam mentioned the stucco versus the siding, or the.
I would agree. If we went to a stucco, it's got to be very closely looked at. You wouldn't want to select something that's incompatible. So we would need to do an inventory of stucco that's used. Specifically, stucco in the Midwest isn't necessarily the greatest product. You got to really detail it good in order to make sure it holds up well. The comment of fiber cement not being a proven product, there are fiber cements that are 25 years old and they look brand new. As long as they're maintained, just like any material, you got to get out there and paint it every 5 years. You can't just let it go. You got to paint it and caulk the seams and everything. That's just part of maintaining a building. So.
All right. Any other questions for either Mr. Edwards or the I got your name already.
Jeremy.
Jeremy, yes.
So we're up to our discussion as a board now?
Yeah. Well, if there are any other questions for staff, or I'm sorry, for the applicant at this time. And again, it is a public meeting. I think there's only a couple of people here from the public. If anybody wants to comment on it, if not, I will close the public comment on this application. Board, what are your thoughts on this? Given.
Okay, I'm going to jump in, and I'm stressing between knowing Sam is right and yet looking at past experiences. If you remember Ironman Properties and Joe Blake, when they were working on the flats, they came forward with quite I guess what I'm seeing is character. And if we go with what Sam's saying, which is true, if you look at, take this building and go downtown and try to match it up, but to take the cornice off the top, granted, it's not Italianate, and I saw this drawing before the cornice, before the double corners on the balconies, and the setback of the storefronts. To me, that's much better than going down the street and seeing a straight, solid, boring building. I'd like to see us get some character in town, even though it is not history. This is a new building. We've got an opportunity to bring a little character to it. I really think they've done a very good job. I like the idea of the stucco as opposed to seeing the siding look, because it looked more like a, well, I hate to say commercial building, but yes. And then with what the gentleman just talked about of that picture for the railings, but keeping those double columns for sure. I'd hate to see you close it up and have just square corners. Sorry, Sam, because there goes the character of this building. And then why have a balcony? Because it would be a narrow, it'd be too little. But not wanting to see people's bikes and junks and stuff, if they can make it like that one, that would help tie it into the district. And wrapping the cornice on this building helps it. Not having it wrapped would be an error. I like it. I like this one that they brought to us that we're seeing today. Take the top of that off, like Sam suggested, and brick in the corners. You're back to a square, commercial-looking, boring building. So I really like what they brought forward. The setback, if you look on this drawing, shows a different structure on the front, so it's not just a straight street. And I know we go way back to before Sam. We were taught, you know, and told that the Iron Man Properties building needed to be straight because the ones downtown are straight. Well, they can put canopies on them and do different things, and to me, the flats is just very boring. It doesn't bring anything structure pleasing to the eye as you drive through town. I would rather look at this than a straight flat front when I work here every day. And the fact that if they stick to what they've shown us with these setbacks and the front storefronts and the 2 columns, and I think it's neat. That's just my 2 bits.
I'd like to see more detail on the usage, front windows in the storefront areas and what materials.
Which they could show down the road, yeah.
And to me, it's a little, maybe a little too modern for my taste.
That's why I like the cornices on the top. I like the column, 2 columns.
I'll say specific in regards to, not the overall building. My comment was more towards I was actually directly towards the retail front windows and doors. And so I'd like to see something different there personally. It's just a very modern approach. And again, I don't think we're trying to reconstruct an old building, but if we can tie in that character, similar to like the Lamar building or the People's Brewery, some type of that style, and work with this. I don't know if how that would flow, but
maybe the 2 large ones on the end would be a storefront and then angled in for the door, something a little dimensional.
Jed, any thoughts? Or
I see it both ways. I don't really like the siding aspect of it.
you do not?
No.
Not.
Because we're trying to, you know, even though it's in a residential area, we're trying to establish the historicity of the commercial buildings here in town. Besides what's been sort of not done well, we don't see that kind of siding. Been altered. We have some buildings like that have been altered. I don't like them either. But so that's the only thing that really bothers me.
Do you like the stucco idea better?
I do like the stucco idea better. And
what about brick all the way?
Well, I mean, Mr. Edwards would probably freak out about price if it was all brick all the way.
And it changes.
So that's up to him, and I'm not here to re-architect, but.
I think that would take away some of the character, or some of the character that we see in the drawing right now.
Yeah, so I keep going back to the North Lebanon property, where you can see that in between the two main parts of the building.
Yeah, there's almost like that in reverse.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But that's my only real comment on preferences or whatever, but like I said, I'm not here to re-architect.
Sure.
So.
The rendering that we're looking at today is square enough, commercial looking enough to take out some of the things that poor Sam was suggesting would make it just the boring blah brick square building. I'd like to see them keep those characters. We need some character. And if it's not right downtown, it's not next to the other buildings, so.
It almost looks like it's one of the buildings you see on the canal downtown.
Yeah, it does.
Kind of reminds me of that a little bit. Any thoughts to the contingencies or any of the things that Sam had brought up, just in terms of things we'd like to see Mr. Edwards do? I mean, it sounds like they're willing to consider maybe a different type of railing or something a little more, something a little more like along the line Sam has suggested on the Heron Morton building.
As long as it's not a solid look.
Yeah, I mean, I guess, do we want to word that? And I don't want to put Derek on the spot, but do we want to word that? Do we want to have something specific in a motion, or do we want to have it where they're kind of working with staff and leave it maybe a little more? Again, not to put it on Derek, but at the same time,
but since you know what we're thinking,
to give, I think your office some leeway as to. You've heard what Sam has said. You've kind of heard what we've said about it. So you can kind of be a little bit of that liaison to say, well, okay, the board said this without us, I guess, committing them to something specific.
Yeah, no, I've been put in that position before, and I've got no problem with that. So there's been enough examples that have gone back and forth specific to the railing that we can definitely get to a compromise on that everybody's comfortable with.
Okay. Any other discussion before we consider a motion?
How would you word this with those stipulations?
well, let me try. I make a motion, we accept the proposal for these 3 phases. It's 3 phases. For construction on these properties, and you guys can pull that out. As given, with our requests to change the siding look to stucco appearance, and address the storefronts so that they are recessed, step back, but have a different character to them. I think that's about all we've really pointed out.
Mm-hmm. And are those the final colors too, these here? Yeah. Okay.
And the railing also, railings?
I did, didn't I?
No, you didn't
Oh,
say railing.
yes, please. The railings to look like what Mr. Edwards mentioned. On what street is it, Superior Street? That picture?
Talbot.
That was in the Heron Morton, on Talbot Street in Indianapolis, that one that he showed.
Okay, yes. Sorry, I butchered it.
And we have a motion, I guess before we jump in, and are those, do you understand what Linda is requesting or asking of you? And I guess, is that something you're comfortable with, or, because I do want to hear from you before we get, before we finalize it.
Yeah, in terms of kind of the spirit of compromise, yes, definitely willing to work through the issues. Derek and his team has been very helpful to work through those.
Okay.
I think of the things that are mentioned in this last round, I'm getting a shaking of a head from Nick in terms of the stucco. What you could do is just give us a little bit of latitude to work with the planning department and figure out how to apply that. He's, I think, worried about it from a maintenance standpoint, and we want to, have a structure that looks great for the next longer period of time.
So you're shaking of the head
from Nick North?
From Nick North was a negative? But this board that you're referring to is more like a cement board?
Yes.
Doesn't it also come in a stucco as far, instead of the lines, to look like siding?
Nick, do you mind to field that one?
Sure.
So does the hardy board come in a stucco-ish?
It doesn't really come in a stucco type of material. It's a hardy board, that kind of material. It's a standard color. It gets cut, designed to the space. You have to caulk it, and you have to paint it. So you don't have as rigidity as your maintenance as you do a stucco. Stucco is meant for warm climates, not a lot of humidity, all those kind of main things of how it weathers over time. So when you're talking about stucco, it's kind of like more as a painting your house every year. It's an intrusive to go back, go redo it, cut, patch, paint again. Kind of like if you paint brick. You're going to paint brick every year when you paint brick. Every 2 years because how it chips and because it doesn't adhere to that type of material very well.
Do you know what's on the prosecuting attorney's office? What's that building called?
Elks Building.
The old Elks Building. They came to us, and that's what I had in mind, something like that, as opposed to the line look, which looks more residential. The Elks Building has that type on it.
Hey, with the hardy board, what you can do is instead of going, if you're worried about lines as the vertical, you can look at the horizontal aspect. So there's ways where you can look at more as like a beat board type, or is that?
No.
So, so I just look at it as more as a long-lasting structure, which you don't have to go back through and have cleaning crews, maintenance crews come in, impacting the site and the area is where I come from on the stucco aspect, instead as possibly looking at a different type of a stone material or another type of additive than stucco that can meet the historical needs of what we need to do for the aesthetic, eye appealing than something that's a standard commercial building.
Does that answer your question, or does that
No.
address, or does it?
No,
Okay.
because I know it exists. He's the pro, I'm not, but I know we approved it for the Elks Building when they redid it. I'd hate to see, because Sam's right, that's more of a residential, you're drawing attention to these are, which they are. But, I mean, if it can't be, that's minimal, but I think he's right, it would look better if it's not, doesn't look like siding.
I agree on that. And there could be a couple other things we can look around to try to eliminate, you know, the horizontal line aspects which you're referring to.
Yes.
There's all types of sizes that you look at. You can go to 4x4, 6x6, 8x8. So there's ways where you can spread out those lines. So instead of you see standard sidings 4x4, so every 4 inches you have that line. Then you have your rib lines. We don't have to worry about rib lines with hardy board as you do with a vinyl siding. So you eliminate your rib lines, but your standard lines that go across, that can be minimized by the size and the space of the hardy board.
Jeremy, you had a comment?
Yeah, I was going to say, it sounds like what you're trying to get to is you prefer a smooth look, no horizontal lines. I don't know the Elks Building, but based on what you're saying, it sounds like it's probably a fiber cement panel, and those come in 4x8 or 5x10 panels. If we do that, we have to be very careful on where we put the reveal joints. Again, that's a solid panel. It's basically like a plywood that you put up, but there will be joints in those when you do that kind of panel.
You have a suggestion, Sam?
The only true way to get a smooth look would be either you put that panel up and then you got to coat it with a stucco, an actual real cementitious stucco product, or you do the EFIS, which I think Sam mentions you don't want to do that. That's not what you're looking for here. But I think the essence of what you're trying to say is you prefer a smooth look versus a siding look. And then maybe it's a creativity on evaluating those options and working with staff on what we can
Yes, and
get
work with staff,
to do that, yeah.
I do have a little bit of concern on that one. Working with staff, that's a whole lot of interpretation there to put on staff. I'd like to get to a point where we can agree on the application of the material. I will say on the Elks building, they were certainly a panel, like Jeremy was saying, but they weren't full panels. You know, they were just cut out, so you never had those reveal joints. And from my experience, like he said, I mean, you're putting pieces of plywood together, so you're going to have these odd joints together. And I think you have a potential for more disaster in that application than you do if you were to do a larger lap measurement, as Nick was saying. And if you go to like an 8-inch instead of like a 4-inch, you'll have less vertical lines. But you're going to have lines in that panel scenario, and I don't think personally that.
And I would agree. I'd rather see the vertical lines looking like siding as opposed to square chunks up there.
Yep.
You guys all right if we drop that portion of it?
I really don't care for that look, the horizontal line. It looks like siding,
Yes.
residential siding, and I don't know how to better away from that. I don't know if
So,
increasing the width of those, you're still going to have that lap siding look.
It's going to be less vertical lines, I suppose, than what you see.
So I think we're all the same
Or horizontal
opinion.
lines, sorry.
We're all the same opinion up here that we would rather not see it look like siding. But if there isn't a product out there, this is better than squared up sections put up.
Yeah, it's just, I think you have to get to a point, if you're going to leave some of the discretion in staff's hands, you got to give me some, something of what you're looking for there, rather than something that doesn't look like siding. That's pretty broad.
Well, if you can't come up with anything, leave it as it is.
Yeah.
Okay.
So could you amend that motion, Linda, to remove the stucco requirement and
Yes.
to,
We haven't voted on it, so she can
Right.
just strike it. Yeah.
okay.
You want to leave it as a smooth face appearance if they cannot.
If
And
possible.
then if they cannot, then we will accept what is presented.
Okay.
I don't think the wider spacing is going to make.
All right, so we have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
Christie, take the roll, please.
Casey Sampson,
Aye.
George Piper.
Aye.
Chad Weed,
Aye.
Linda Ridgway.
Aye.
All right, motion carries. Thank you, Mr. Edwards, for your patience, and I hope you appreciate your patience, and as well hope you appreciate our position that we're looking at what's best for Lebanon as well as what's best for historic preservation. So, thank you. All right. Our last item on the agenda, or next item on the agenda, is a request from Matt Jackson for a COA for 127 to 129 North Meridian Street. It's a COA for an overall building restoration, including storefront restoration, brick and mortar restoration, window and door restoration / replacement, cornice repair, exterior paint, brick repair, brick cleaning, and tuck pointing.
Anything else?
We'll hear from staff first, please.
George, I think you hit the nail on the head here. Certainly, last but not least in this agenda item here. So Matt and Kelly Jackson are proposing a restoration and preservation of the facade of this building, removing several of the elements that are not historic, and installing elements back into the building that bring it more back to a historic feel. In this, I mean, it's a very lengthy staff report, which you have in front of you. The applicant has been, I've communicated with the applicant on proper procedures on how to clean brick, how to repair the mortar, what type of specific mortar to use, not a concrete-based mortar, a lime-based mortar, why he would need to do that. He's also applying for grant money from the RDC, so that's why some of the information you see in here in your packet does not necessarily apply to the COA, but again, the applicant has to have a COA from the HPC to be able to provide RDC application for grant funds. The applicant has also brought with him a kind of scope that reflect the numbers on what it is, the expenses that he's providing. He just got that today, so I believe he brought copies of that with him, so he'll pass that out to you. Again, doesn't necessarily apply because he's not asking for grants from this commission, but I wanted him to provide those tonight if possible so that you could just see the scope of what the work that is he's putting in this building. Linda, I agree with you. It's freezing in this room right now. My nose is like an icicle. I don't know what's going on. So, are there any questions from my staff report? And my staff report. I'm sorry?
Before hypothermia sets in?
I think it feels absolutely delightful. I don't know what this is. They could go down a couple degrees.
This is perfect sleeping weather, I agree. So, you know, I took most of the points here from the narrative that the applicant provided me to include in my staff report. So, everything that you'll hear from him is basically in this staff report here tonight.
All right, thank you. Sam, do you want to touch upon Landmark's report real quick? Sure. And I say real quick when there's 16 things in your report.
Yes.
Or 21. I can't remember how many there were now.
And it's probably not necessary to break it down that much. But I think overall this project definitely has transformative potential for the building. Just some specifications we have. If the brick is repointed in areas, lime-based mortar should probably be used, and it might be wise to do some analysis of the mortar composition, just because today's Portland cement-based mortar can do damage to historic brick walls. I'll put up the main facade rendering as it was submitted. Just a couple things. I would say that the windows, the design for the windows needs to be studied a little bit more, and that should probably be a contingency of awarding the COA. I think the proposed windows are an aluminum-clad wood window. Those, they're always pitched as being, kind of a modern alternative to wood windows that's supposed to be lower maintenance, but it is found that, that there actually tend to be more issues with wood rot when you put the aluminum on, and sometimes just a traditional wood window is the best way to go, and that's my recommendation. I would also say, having taken a look at some historic photos of this building from the early 20th century, the window sash frames look a little bit thin. If you look at the vertical stiles and the horizontal rails, they're not quite as substantial as you would expect to see on historic windows. So I would also recommend beefing up those rails and stiles to establish visual compatibility. And then, just based on what the design guidelines specify, if you're going to reconstruct a historic feature, the reconstruction should be grounded in, documentation of the original appearance of the building as much as possible. So since there are historic photographs available, I know there might be awnings in the way, but to the greatest extent possible, the reconstruction of the southernmost storefront should be, what was there, and not conjectural. And it should also be complete, rather than just, reconstructing the transom section here, or the section above the transom. I would say the lower portion should also be brought to its appearance from the same period. So, I think the best example is the existing storefront on the north half of that facade. I don't think any of the other points I had in the staff report were terribly important to the outcome of the project, other than also, I think, if there happen to be any historic windows discovered in the window openings that are currently bricked up or covered, they should be restored rather than replaced. And here, and also around the side, where previous doorways and openings are supposed to be restored in this project, again, photographic evidence and other historic documents should be referred to. Some of these proposals, like the division of lights in this door, are not appropriate to the character of the building and probably don't look like what would have been there historically. As we've talked about in other meetings, historically you tend to have a more vertical orientation of lights in windows too. So some of these primarily horizontal lights above the transom, you might want to divide with some smaller muntins inside, just so they're composed of more vertically oriented panes instead of just horizontal. But those are minor tweaks to what I think is otherwise a strong proposal that seems to be compatible with the ordinance, the design standards, and Secretary of the Interior standards. And I think if the petitioner could work with staff to make sure that some of those caveats are addressed. I think with those contingencies, it would be advisable to award a COA.
Thank you, Sam. Any questions for staff from the board? Nope. If not, we'll hear from Mr. Jackson. Appreciate your patience tonight. Hope you had dinner before you came.
Not yet. That's okay. Matt Jackson, 690 North, 600 West, Lebanon, Indiana. And I've got a couple budgets if I could bring you guys that.
Testing.
Thank you. Okay, I'll give you a brief history on kind of how this came about. Really started talking to Derek about wanting to potentially buy a building downtown to put a real estate office for our firm on the north side. I'm currently in downtown Indianapolis, but live out here. And my brother joined my firm about a year ago, and one of the things we talked about was getting a building where we wanted to do it. And we had the idea of, hey, let's do it in Lebanon. And there wasn't anything available at the time. And we were able to kind of uncover this through some personal connections, and lo and behold, we ended up buying it. So I think we've closed mid-January, and since that time I've worked pretty closely with Derek and Fred Jones, or CF Jones, and Mitch Design out of Carmel on some concept ideas and whatnot. And I actually agree with Sam as far as the windows. They weren't exactly how I would have done it, but due to timing, I was like, this will work for now. So definitely am open to a retooling of those, without a doubt. As far as the exterior, I mean, it's really more of fixing what's already good. I mean, it's got some great bones. We really like the look of it. There's not a ton of change other than cleaning of the brick, tuck pointing, painting of the cornice, and the windows are obviously a big piece as well. And then the storefront of what's currently Patrick's space, because we don't know what's behind some of that's there. There's some metal pieces, the awning, and some bracing that, again, we just won't quite know what's there until we get it off. But the plan is to continue the existing storefront of the Truett Law Office. As Sam was saying, would probably be the best anyway. That's really what we like to do as well. The door that's in the middle currently, that is the access to the second floor. It's pretty small, but there's nothing that we plan on doing that would be very, very flashy. It's not like we have a lot of visitors. It's really more for our offices. So the purpose wouldn't be to draw attention to that space at all. As far as budgeting and what, I've worked pretty closely with Fred, and again, as I said, and we will be getting a second bid. One of the tough things we've had on this one is that there's a lot of unknowns. And Derek laughed at it because I sent this to him today, and the first time he saw it, he's probably like, it's changed a little, right? And it has, but structurally there's some interesting things about that building. One, there is a partial basement, and then as you enter the door, that would be the access to the second floor. You get to the top, and there's about a 6-foot wide hallway, probably 6 feet. But we think that both of those walls are actually structural. So we're looking at the options in regards to, can we take some of those out and put in an I-beam and then actually put down vertical beams for the bracing of it to open it up. If we don't do it, otherwise the two spaces that would be existing would be, I think, about 16 by 125 square feet. So we're not super pumped about having a bowling alley on the second floor downtown, but that's what it'd feel like. So we're getting through that. We're not that far yet. So just to give you an idea of some of the internal struggles we're having, I'm pleasantly surprised to tell you the outside is not going to be the hardest part, or at least the most gut-wrenching on what we do.
All right. Any questions for the applicant? And as opposed to the previous application, this one is, kind of has the more that historic building feel to it, kind of more kind of up our alley, so to speak, or at least it feels that way. And, I think this is a building that, if you go anywhere in Lebanon, you see this building probably, every day if you live here, if not, more than once a day. So I think it's the changes, the changes for the positive. I think it's going to, excited to see this project, see this building getting some love.
I concur, and I think we should call the question.
Before we do that, I know Sam mentioned, and I know you did too, Mr. Jackson, maybe revisiting the windows a little bit, or looking at doing something different there. And again, not to put Derek on the spot, but is that something that you're comfortable with working with?
What you're talking about here.
Okay. Yes. All right. Great.
A quick question.
Yeah.
So you are going to add the rest of that cornice across?
That would be the game plan, yes, to match that up.
And the stairway door that's going up, is there any way it could look a little more old?
I doubt it, because my guess is that it's pretty narrow now. I don't know if I could add a whole lot of ornate decoration of like framing.
Well,
or,
yes.
But
I think you provided this in your packet,
that
right?
would not be, I don't think that's from me.
This was in the packet. It's Lamar.
That.
Wasn't? Somehow it got,
I think that should have been in there.
I thought maybe it was a
I'll go back
sample.
and look.
It actually is flat now, so it is, there's
Well,
no.
yes,
Yeah.
but beside this, they found a door, and I don't know what the door was. But as opposed to glass, just solid glass, I thought maybe something neat will be behind there, who knows?
Yeah, the door that exists to go upstairs,
This one.
yeah, that one right there. It's currently it's probably the best way to say it's kind of like a chicken coop door that's got a padlock on it.
Yeah.
It's like barn siding, right?
Yeah, kind of. Yeah.
With a padlock, I
unattractive.
think. Yeah, okay. I go by it a couple times a
You
day.
wouldn't like it
Yeah.
that.
It's been a little tough to see around upstairs too. Just I don't know if you've noticed, but I think even on one of the reports it said remove the brick infill of the windows, right? Well, those are actually just painted brick plywood to match the exterior brick. They did a great job, believe it or not. But it is not brick.
And I know it's late and go off topic, but I've been in my building for 5 years, and only last summer when we were doing this downtown revitalization plan did I finally realize those were painted.
Yep.
I really thought those were brick did, so they did a good job.
I did too. Yeah, I did too. Yeah, they're not, and they've faded actually a lot over the last couple of years, so they looked better before. But and on Sam's comment too, as far as the saving of any of the windows, we don't think there are any frames that are still existing, but we kind of won't know again until we get some of that plywood off and get a little bit closer look. We don't think there is, but we're not certain. So it would probably be more of a time-specific window product that we'd be looking to go to.
What's your timeline?
It's a good question. Our goal is to finalize this piece of it and then really allow the structural engineer to have at it, because we're going to need to do a little demo inside to figure out what can't be moved. We've hired a code consultant too, because there is no second means of ingress egress right now. I don't know if I'm going to have to do a exterior stair. There's a lot of things we're just not certain about. So those folks, once we finalize this part of the project, we'll turn them loose. But our goal would be to be in before the end of the year, which is kind of aggressive, but that's still what we'd like to do.
Start or to finish?
To finish.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's terrific, and
Thank you.
getting that awning off of there and that big sign and open those windows up, yeah. It'd be
Yeah.
nice.
And hopefully too, with this new grant procedure, you know, you'll get more money, or, you know, substantially more money potentially than what you certainly would have gotten from us beforehand. So I think that's the benefit of the way that we've redone that process now, is that it's going to make a lot more financial sense, I think, for business owners, building owners to invest in their properties, and that's what we want.
Yep, I agree. We're pretty excited about it too. And again, it would just be our office, just so you know. So it'd be our real estate office, and probably about 5 or 6 people there on a daily basis. But
You have to stay out of the candy store.
the kids are like, "Hey, we get free candy, right?" I was like, "That's not how it works." And I do believe at this time all the tenants have planned on staying, so there wouldn't be any changes downstairs as far as tenancy is concerned for the time being, and unless somebody changed their mind.
All right. There's no other comments or questions. I will entertain a motion.
Moved.
A motion from Casey Sampson to approve the COA, and I guess also, is that also with they'll work with Derek's office?
Yes.
With staff on the windows? Okay. Do we have a second?
Second.
Christie, the roll, please.
Casey Sampson.
Aye.
George Piper.
Aye.
Chad Weed. Linda Ridgway.
Aye.
Motion carries 4-0. Thank you. I hope the wait was worth it.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
All right. Do we have other business before the board tonight? Okay. Hearing no other business, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Have a second?
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All right, we are adjourned. Thank you.
Left side much warmer.